welcome to the March 17, 2021 regular meeting of the Lake Bluff Joint Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals. If we could have a call to order and a roll call, Mr. Cole, please.
Certainly. Member Burns.
Here.
Member Danley.
Here.
Member Fisher.
Here.
Member Miller is absent. Member Ryder.
Here.
Member Russell.
Here.
And Chair Peters.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, non-agenda items and visitors public comment time. The Joint Commission allocates 15 minutes during this time period for those individuals who would like the opportunity to address the board on a matter that's not listed on the agenda. Any individual out there, Glenn, that wishes to participate tonight?
We're seeing none, Mr. Chairman. At any point, if people would like to speak, give testimony, you can use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. There's also a Q&A feature as well if you'd like to ask to be recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Agenda item number 3, consideration of the February 17, 2021 PCZBA regular meeting minutes. Have all of the commissioners have had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
Any proposed revisions or other changes?
Member Russell, just one change, the bottom of the first page and the top of the second page, the phrase "above the business" is used twice. I was asking questions about that apartment that was near the auto body place, and it's in a building next to the business on the second floor, not above the business. The auto body business is a one-story building. That should be changed.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Any other proposed revisions or other changes? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve, please?
Motion to approve.
We have a second?
Second.
We have a vote, please, Mr. Cole.
Certainly. Member Burns.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Fisher.
Aye.
Member Miller, who I'll note has joined us. Good evening.
Good evening, and I say aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
And Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, public hearing, 210 West Washington Avenue, residential variation. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview, please.
And certainly, and in this case, I've asked Ms. Samantha Lennox to provide the staff presentation on this item.
Thank you.
I am just going to share my screen. One second, please. Okay. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, well, the PCZBA received a letter of intent on February 18th this year for a side yard setback variation needed to build a 2-car garage and remodel the interior of this home at 210 West Washington. The 2-car garage will be built where the existing 1-car garage is on the southwest side of the home. Currently, 6.5 feet is provided for the side yard setback. Based on the zoning code, existing structures built before February 15th, 1994, like this home, must have a reduced side yard setback based on the existing side yard. However, the applicant's improvements will exceed 50% of the existing structure, so this exception no longer applies. The applicant is requesting a variation of 9.7% or 0.7 feet so that they can have a 7.2 feet side yard setback to accommodate their addition. Since this addition is less than 25% of the applicable standard, the PCZBA has the authority to grant with special conditions or deny this variation. And I am also going to share a photo of their yard if you would like to finish this overview, Glenn.
Yeah, so just by way of comments, we did receive one comment on this item from an adjacent neighbor, Sam Badger, who recall once served on the commission. So he just wanted to note that the playground structure you can see here in this photo towards the lower left is not included in the survey presented by the applicant. I'll read a few excerpts here. He said the plans for the remodel look great. The side yard variation is nominal and seems reasonable from my point of view. He lives north of the subject property, and he said that it appears that the encroachment to the side yard won't affect their property. I'm happy to read this in greater detail, but he goes on to say that, his property and others in this area have stormwater concerns, and certainly believes that this needs to be included in impervious surface calculations. He concluded by saying that as long as this remodel stays within the impervious surface limit, that he would have no objections. So we did verify there's a considerable amount of impervious surface capacity left on this lot, even after building out that addition. So happy to answer any questions on that piece or regarding the memorandum.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Is the applicant present?
Yes, sir, I am.
If you could state your name for the record, please.
My name is Ben Grum.
Okay, Ben. If you could raise your right hand, Ben. Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed, Ben.
So again, this is my first time doing this. I hope that the applications answered most of the questions, and Samantha did a great job of summarizing what we're looking to do. I think the most important thing to look at here, and what was most important for me and my wife deciding how we were going to make this location work for our family, is we did take serious consideration into the amount of green space that we do have on this lot. It is a pretty decent sized lot for our area and our neighborhood. And we looked through many different options, one of which was a driveway that led to the backyard, and a garage was put as a separate structure, and things like that we took into consideration, basically everything we could possibly do. And this one is the one that literally expands the footprint of the house the least. But again, we did have this little variance issue. So all I really wanted to add to that, outside of what was included in the application, is there was, being that we grew up here, live here, and plan to raise our children here, we did take serious consideration into the amount of ground space and the footprint of the house. And as you can see, when you look at the Plata survey, which is the easiest to kind of tell the scope of everything, of the space that the two-car garage is going to occupy, just over a third of it is actually either currently a covered patio for the front door, or the current one-car garage. So of the actual footprint, you're only talking roughly 2/3 of a two-car garage total. And then again, the part that requires that variance is pretty important in terms of making it wide enough for two cars to comfortably fit. And then also, if you look at the second floor plans, which we did include, not that it's impossible to build the second floor without it. It does create some structural issues that we would have to tackle that would be relatively great. So that's kind of all I have to add. Hopefully that answers your questions. And again, thank you guys for all the work that you do. We do appreciate it. And we take into consideration, I think, a lot of the things you guys take into consideration when you're making your decisions. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. And you submitted your standards for variation, and we'll adopt and incorporate those by reference into the record. Any questions from the commissioners?
Just George Russell here. Just one point of clarification for everyone, because I don't think it's really clear in the report. We're asking not only for variation to extend the garage wall forward to keep it at that same line, but because they're putting a second story, even though it's under a sloping roof under their house, they're actually getting a variation to raise the height of the wall. It's that same 7/10 of a foot, very minor. But they're technically getting a variation for both, going forward and up.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Ms. Danley.
It's always a tough one, isn't it? I live in a one-car garage home. I'm trying not to remind myself that, you know, we have hardships living in this town with a lot of shared driveways, one car versus two. I would never even consider going for a variance. So, you know, I applaud you for making this bold attempt. I'm just, yeah, I just want to hear more from everybody else really about this. I think it's a little variance issue is actually a big variance when it comes to really taking all of the parameters into account. But the neighbor that you said spoke that there was no issue or didn't have a problem except for the stormwater, was that on the side of the garage or was that on the other side of the of your house?
I don't actually know that neighbor. Glenn can speak. I know I've spoken to the neighbors to the left and right of me and across the street who all got your letter. All of them were trying to be as nice as possible, but basically told me that they were very glad to see that we were going to be upgrading and improving. I think they wanted to say the eyesore, but they were being very nice to me. So I have talked to the ones, you know, to the left and to the right and then across the street. In terms of behind me, I don't know which neighbor submitted that letter. And I do recognize the water issue he is talking about. And we've done some minimal things in the backyard. We've actually done some drainage work back there to actually help alleviate that. And I think all the neighbors behind us have benefited from that improvements that we have made. But again, I don't know that gentleman or where he resides in comparison to my house.
Yeah, member Danley, he resides to the north, I believe, on the plat survey you have. I believe he's on the lot indicated as lot 5.
Lot 5.
Not 100% sure on that, but again, northerly of this property, which is the rear side of the property.
Member Burns.
Yeah, so thank you for the good presentation. And how I look at this is you still have a significant amount of impervious surface, in particular to the stormwater issue. And I'm not seeing it exactly, but I would imagine you still have a fair amount of bulk available too. So those are, to me, the two kind of hot topics in the village that I think we need to be most concerned about is bulk and impervious surface from a stormwater and just density perspective, neither of which really are affected by this in my opinion. So yeah, you are encroaching by, what is it, 7 inches or so. So I don't really see that as a big problem, and considering the alternatives of, you know, tearing down a house and putting up something much bulkier and going to the limits on those and impervious surface, and it is going to be an improvement to the area. I think your neighbors will actually appreciate that. So I'm in favor of it.
Yeah, and just to add to your comments, if you look at the plat survey, there's a retaining wall behind the house. And if you go 10 feet to the north there, that whole end of the yard is almost unusable for probably 2 months in the spring. And for us to have put a garage back there, which is one of the ideas that could be done without a variance, supposedly, it would have resulted in creating a large problem. I think. I don't think there's any way about that we could have done that and not created a larger problem than we would have here. So.
Thank you, Mr. Grum. Member Miller.
I think this is a fair variance to be given. I think 7 inches is certainly not going to make or break anybody's. Oops, sorry about that. It's not going to make or break the. But the problem, I don't see a problem with this. I think it's part of a total rebuild of the house. I look at it more like if they're going to add a second story, they need the enlarged garage more than saying you need a 2-car garage versus a 1-car garage. So if you're looking at the whole picture, I think it is an asset to the community and you're not impinging on anybody's space, and certainly the impervious surface is not an issue. So I have no qualms with this approving this rehab.
Thank you, Member Miller. Member Ryder.
Yes, I would echo what Member Miller was saying, as well as Member Burns. I think in particular, the point that how the homeowner is making these needed improvements in a way that is, from what little I can tell, one of the least impactful ways that he might be able to make this this home work for him is significant. Not increasing significantly the stormwater problems and that they are experiencing, and so I would support this and just appreciate the homeowner taking an interest in this home and making it work for he and his family.
Thank you, Member Ryder. Member Fisher.
Yeah, I'm also in support of it. The wall is already there, kind of the edge of the property for the original house. I think it was already a shorter setback prior to the changes. So it's just really continuing it from the street. I think it's going to look relatively similar to what's already covered over. Granted, it's going to be a 2-story, but the front of the house, I think, will look relatively similar because there's a lot of coverage anyway. And the curves right there, so that kind of gives you a little bit more relief. Let's say you're not looking at a line of straight houses and such. So I think it's a nice addition to the neighborhood, and I'd be in support.
Thank you, Member Fisher. Member Russell.
I'm in support of this. That it would be very difficult to extend that wall up and bump it in 7 inches or have that jog in the garage wall. This is completely rational and very, very little impact to the overall property.
Thank you, Member Russell. I too am not opposed to this petition. I think it's certainly reasonable. I think there's some extenuating factors that the Grums are trying to address, and so I feel comfortable with the petition also. Any other discussion among the commissioners? Any comment from the public other than Mr. Badger?
Seeing none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there a motion?
I'll make the motion to support the petition as described.
Thank you, Member Miller. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, if we could have a vote, please.
Certainly, and I would note here that you have the authority to grant this variation directly. Again, that would not be a recommendation to the village board.
Just quickly for clarification of the motion, and I believe it was Member Miller who made the motion. Is it the motion is, I would assume, is to approve the ordinance?
Grant a variation.
Right, but pursuant to the terms that are in the draft ordinance that is in your packet?
Elliot, we can approve it or not approve it. So I think you
Right, I
just
just
got.
want to make sure that it's contingent upon the conditions that are set forth in the document that's in your packet.
Exactly,
Yep.
as you said.
Thank you, Mr. Schuster.
All right. Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
Member Fisher,
Aye.
Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
So Mr. Grum, by way of explanation, you're done as of now. So I will have some paperwork for you to sign here in the next few days. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grum. All right. Agenda item number 5, public hearing, 673 Maple Avenue, residential variation. Mr. Cole, if you could give us an overview, please.
Certainly. So I'm happy to go into more detail if the commission would like, of course. In short, this is an irregular lot. It's a historic landmark within the village. Previously, back in, I believe it was 2018, this commission considered and recommended, and the village board provided front yard setback relief for some to allow for the partial reconstruction of part of this building and to restore some of the historic features and et cetera. Again, all those plans are provided with the original application in your packet. In this case, in the village, there's a time limit on how long you have to realize or consummate, if you would, a variation after it's approved. You have 12 months to pull a permit and start. That can be potentially extended an additional 12 months upon request. But if you don't start it before it expires, you have to start over. And so that's the situation we have here. Mr. Douglas is the applicant. He's, of course, here and available to present or to answer any questions, but he's submitted the exact same plans, seeks the exact same relief in this instance. Of course, you may determine that circumstances have changed since then. You're not locked into your previous decision. We can talk more about that if we need to. The other aspect of this I'll note is, again, this is a historic structure in the village. In 2018, it received an approval for advisory review from our Historic Preservation Commission, and they're aware of this reapplication. Because of a difference in the code that may change, that same shot clock principle, if you would, doesn't apply to their reviews and their relief. So just understand that there's no recommendation from them this time around, but that's not an absence of support or anything like that. So again, happy to answer any questions before Mr. Douglas gets started.
Thank you, Mr. Cole. Is Mr. Douglas available, please?
If you can unmute yourself, you're ready to go, Mr. Douglas.
I apologize. Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Douglas, if you could state your name for the record, and then we'll swear you in and we'll get started.
Okay, my name is Rob Douglas. Live at 673 Maple Avenue, Lake Bluff.
And you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
I do, yes.
Thank you. Please proceed.
So, do you want me to speak at this point?
Yes.
Okay.
One.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add to this packet. As you know, June of 18, we received landmark status from the Historic Preservation Commission. And then in July of 18, we came to the PCZBA for a front yard variance, which we received. And I'll be honest, I didn't realize the variances are good for 1 year, and then you can actually renew or extend it for one more year after that. So due to circumstances, I wasn't able to start the work in 18 or 2019. Then, of course, we went through the pandemic process. We're coming out on the other side, and I would like to be able now get this project started, but I need to get the variance that was granted in 2018 reinstated due to the expiration of the time period I was given when I was granted the variance. So any questions you may have, I'm more than happy to answer, but I think everything's pretty much the same as it was when it was submitted back in July of 2018.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Douglas. Mr. Cole, do you recall who was sitting on the commission back on, when we addressed this back in 2018?
There have been a few changes in faces, certainly. Give me just a moment here. Should have been Member Russell, Member Burns, Member Danley, myself.
I was there.
And yeah, so 5 out of 7 were sitting.
Yeah, I've got, this was Sam Badger, David Burns, Jill Danley, Elliot Miller, Jim Murray, George Russell, and yourself, Mr. Chairman.
So the 2 additions were Ms. Fisher and Ms. Ryder.
That's correct.
All right.
I will add also here as a point of interest, you know, something we've knew we needed to do as staff with the pandemic, and also I think we'll do here to benefit situations like Rob's in the future is we're going to start reminding applicants if they're coming up on this this expiration date in the future.
I think that's a really good idea because Rob had such an exceptional presentation back in 18. We all unanimously approved it, and we're rather appreciative of what you're doing for an old house and upgrading it with all the variants of concern and care to give it that historical status. So I just don't think we need to spend a lot of time. However, I know there's 2 people on the board that have not seen this before, but you know, this is deja vu, and we approved it, and I can't imagine not approving it again. But anyone else?
Yep, thanks, Jill. Just for the record, I agree as well. I approved it then, and I still would approve it today.
And I'll just say, if I might, this is Member Ryder, I certainly agree. I think I'm only glad that I got to see the plans. So wasn't on it before, but it was fascinating to read through, and I appreciate the work that you're doing on this home. So I'm in favor.
Yeah, and I'm a new member on the committee, but having gone through the packet and everything, I think it's marvelous. I don't see any changes, you know, in circumstance or anything else, so I'd certainly be in total favor.
Any other comments from the commissioners?
I have nothing to add.
And then again, I believe we can adopt and incorporate by reference the submissions by Mr. Davis with respect to the various standards. I take it, Mr. Davis, no further comment from you?
Mr. Douglas?
Mr. Douglas, I should say.
Yeah. Wasn't sure where Mr. Davis was. Yeah, I have no questions, no questions.
Any further discussions from the commissioners? Hearing none, is there a motion?
I make a motion.
Member Russell, second.
So I believe I heard a motion by Miller and a second by Russell.
Thank you.
Recommending approval of the ordinance granting a variation from the village's front yard setback restrictions.
I'll make it Russell 1, Miller 2nd.
Okay. Any further discussion among the commissioners, or are we prepared to vote? Hearing none, if we could have a roll call, please.
Certainly. Member Burns,
Aye.
Member Russell,
Aye.
Member Ryder,
Aye.
Member Fisher,
Aye.
Member Danley,
Aye.
Member Miller,
Aye.
and Chair Peters.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right, thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I appreciate letting me do a rerun here. So, okay,
Pay
thank
for
Thank
it.
you.
Okay. Agenda item number 6, accessory dwelling unit workshop.
Certainly. We'll just give our presenter a moment to join us. And then in the interlude, Ms. Ryder, I'm just going to confirm, I've got a second person here named Susan Ryder, member. Is that you as well? Would you like to switch?
I may switch. Yeah, I'm having trouble with my my video here, so that's what I'm doing. I'll log out altogether and just pop back in on my other device. That works for you.
Okay.
Okay, that's
That
what
is
you were on to me.
A-okay.
Okay, I'll be right back.
Member Burns, I was trying to think of a comment on the same lines. We all see the world a little differently, I suppose.
Yep. Member Ryder, I'm guessing you know you're perpendicular. There you go. Okay.
I really am having trouble.
Much clearer.
Yeah, it is a lot clearer, right? I know. So thank you.
All right, Mr. Cole, how would you like to proceed?
Certainly, I think if it's all right with everyone, I'll give a brief refresher on where we started, where we've come, and then we'll turn it over to Valerie to take it from there. So starting really in July of last year, we the Plan Commission, started some discussions around accessory dwelling units, really as we're looking again at the village's comprehensive plan and housing policies, and how do we really solve probably one of the biggest questions, if you would, in the 1997 comprehensive plan, which is just trying to introduce alternative housing types, trying to add housing types that work for different parts and segments of our community, and bearing in mind that we, since that plan was adopted, we've gone, I believe, -2 down for a number of alternative housing units with the removal of 2 apartments in the central business district. I suppose you can say we've gone up to now, back to neutral with the recent approval of the Arden Shore subdivision, but still, again, trying to figure out ways that we can be more responsive, not just to the market demands, but also to the needs of some members of our community. So there was the start of a discussion in July. In August and September, mostly in August, we worked through what regulations may look like. After that point, we started, as staff, we started working with, some architects in town and others to try and put together some prototypes for you. And unfortunately, the first people we engaged with, that wasn't quite, couldn't quite reach an agreement on that. But earlier this year, we retained Valerie to do some of this work for us. And again, just by way of refresher, these are some of the ideas we talked about in July. How can you make these new housing types? We could look at greenfield development, previously undeveloped spaces. We can look at mixed use and downtown redevelopment, much like the apartments on Block 4 that were removed. We can look at incremental infill in some of our transitional areas. We can look at accessory dwellings, which in some ways is a historic concept, and then maybe a little different idea, but just aside from thinking of physical changes, new masses or things like that, maybe you can think of ways to make our current housing stock or new housing stock just a bit more usable by these people. So that's really the terrain that this discussion has happened in. Before we kick it off, I'll just mention, we received one piece of public comment about this, which is from Jason Trombley. You'll recall his proposal to build his family's new residence in the eastern part of Block 3 came up in July and August as well. And that was one of the things driving that conversation. He did share that his mother, you might recall he talked about their family needs at the time, and he shared that his mother has moved in with them at this point. She's, I think, living in their home office. So again, the needs are real around this topic. And, I did offer to speak with him and look at some options. Depending on how this conversation goes, we may try to find options that could let you consider this on a different track. But bearing in mind that, this is the second example in this year, I should say, of maybe that underscores the interest in these regulations. So I'm happy to answer any introductory questions, or we can turn it over to Valerie.
But I've got
Member
one.
Russell,
Oh, go ahead.
Member Russell, I have a question for Mr. Kolk. Glenn, it's my recollection, I apologize, now that I'm the same age as old people, I forget things. Trombley proposal complied with all of our regulations as we currently have them drafted, with the exception of the very regulation itself that wouldn't allow an accessory dwelling unit. Is that correct?
It's been a while since I looked at it. There were a couple other minor changes to the house that were really unrelated, but that's my recollection, yes.
Okay, thank you.
This is Member Burns. Glenn, do we have feedback from the board, the village board, or the architectural review committee? I can't remember. I was looking in the minutes and it was all planning commission zoning board minutes. Have they looked at any of this or discussed it and given any feedback, or has it only been in our purview until now?
Yeah, so back at the end of August, after your August discussion, I gave an informational presentation to the village board. I would say certainly there was some interest. They wanted to see where that conversation went, I think is a fair summary. At that time, when we thought that we would reach this stage sooner, we thought that there would perhaps be some joint discussions, with this board and the architectural board of review, or we would look at ways to bring in their feedback really as you were getting on the road to perhaps towards adoption. And certainly that's still an option. Again, that all depends on the speed we're comfortable going and what issues are still remaining to be resolved.
Okay, and the reason I ask that is, as this came up again, I kind of thought that's where we were at. And I know Member Russell wanted to see some 3D representations to better understand the maximum height of the roof versus mean height of the roof. And I knew that was one point of it, but I thought, aside from that, I thought we were pretty close. And I remember the outcome of it being, let's do some sort of a meeting with the board and the village board and whatnot. So I guess I'm not opposed to having this conversation about the roof and the height and the work that was what looks to be great work done by Valerie and her organization. But I just want to put in the context that I think last I checked, we're pretty close and aligned on this, and we don't have to go through everything from ground up again. From what I understand in the minutes and just our general agreement, or is there more than that I'm not understanding?
Yeah, I'd react to that in a couple ways. So there's a little bit, I think, fine tuning to do around, perhaps height and that daylight plane type rule is really where there's a little bit of dialing in to do.
Right.
Mostly, I would say if what you're seeing here is what you visualized and expected, then you may very well be close. Again, I think these are fairly developed, and certainly you have my apologies that it took this long to be able to bring this product back to you.
No, that's no problem at all. No apologies necessary. I just didn't want to rehash stuff for the sake of rehashing. If we want to go back and discuss it, if someone has issues with it, that's great. Just don't want to, reinvent the wheel here. Thank you.
Would you like to introduce Valerie? Mr. Cole.
Certainly. So Valerie Bernstein is a licensed architect and a credentialed city planner, much like myself until recently. Well, she's been working in architecture for some time, and I'll let her really go through her experience, but experience in Washington, D.C., here in Chicago, some very notable projects. She's currently, very recently, happy to report, is at now a senior planner, I believe, with the village of Orland Park down in the Southwest, but we managed to start working together before that time. And so certainly she brings a unique perspective for, again, being a professional architect with residential commercial site experience, and also having that planning background and really speaking our lingo. So I hope that, I trust that she's given us some good stuff to chew on here. Valerie, you can take it away.
Sure thing. Thanks, Glenn. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Wonderful. Good evening, everybody. Let me go ahead and share my screen so I can queue up my PowerPoint. And I've got a little intro slide on there, so I'll talk a little bit more about who I am. Okay, here we are, the village of Lake Bluff. And we've kind of covered the intro on accessory dwelling units, so that was helpful. I'll just jump right in. My name is Valerie Bernstein, and I am, as Glenn said, both a licensed architect and a certified community planner. And so doing something like this, I was pretty excited to step in and help out because it really hits that niche of the two, my two trades and type of studies that I really enjoy to do. So I recently moved to Chicago a couple years ago, previously on the East Coast in Washington, D.C., but bringing almost 15 years of experience working primarily in the private sector for a few different firms where I've done everything from community planning at the scale of 600 acres down to architectural detailing and complex problems or projects like labs and hospitals, as well as residences where it's really about responding to the needs of the owners and making sure that at the end of the day, they get a project that every day they walk into and just are happy with. So some of my time in DC, I did do some residential work similar to probably what you're seeing in Lake Bluff, things like just like the topics on the conversation today about adding on additions or going before the planning board to appeal for variances and that sort of thing. So I've got a wide range of experience that I was happy to bring to your village and your study. So Glenn provided me with the draft regulations that you're working with, as well as some of the meeting minutes and conversations. So I was able to take a look at this along with the existing regulations, with the task of putting together these illustrations that take the words and turn it into pictures to understand what really will the impact be in the built community once, if these were to go into effect. I kind of put the purpose here. I thought that was a helpful guideline, that it's really about creating those high quality choices. Glenn touched upon this, meeting some of your comp plan goals, and really providing housing for all different types of people, whether they're new residents coming into town or old ones that are maybe trying to stay there. And I thought this graphic about the types of accessory dwelling units would be helpful because, of course, there are several different ways that you can fit an ADU on a site. And what we wanted to do with this study was look at what is going to be the largest impact to a lot and to the neighbors. So the idea was, let's max out and see if it's possible to get a detached freestanding ADU. And if that's possible, then we'll understand that kind of most of those others, you could probably come back down and say, well, if you can do detached, you're going to be able to do attached. You can probably do that upper level or something above the garage, that sort of thing. So that was part of my task and my outline as I approach this. How can we achieve, or is it possible? Is it possible to achieve that detached ADU on 3 different prototypical sites? And as I jumped into this, thinking about it as both an architect and a planner, I always like to say, what's the greatest limitation first? Because if there's one thing that's going to just say not at all possible, I want to know that right up front. So I start with lot coverage. And I'm going to walk through a series of slides that have a lot of tabulations and calculations for each one of these things. I'll try not to just ramble too much about math, but make sure that we're going through it logically so that everyone's following along. So first up, we'll take a look at the lot coverage. After that, your FAR criteria, which I kind of rolled into a gross floor area, since the FAR is actually a little bit more complicated than a straightforward FAR. So the gross floor area restrictions, the ADU size, which is kind of governed either by 40% of your principal floor area or these other maximum criterias. And then after determining each of those things, what's possible to be built, it's about locating it on the site. So then what are the side setbacks? And one site took it into 3D, looking at the daylight planes with that as well. So we took 3 kind of groupings of the zoning, the E2, the estate districts, which E1, E2, pretty similar. R2 and R3, again, somewhat similar. And so picked a prototypical site after looking at a number of the different lots and kind of what's the coverage like, what's the existing development character, selected a site and was able to zone in or zoom in a little bit on what are those characteristics, but having the room to massage it so that we're not exactly sworn to one particular site, but capturing the characteristics that we see throughout that entire neighborhood. And then in R4, which we'll tackle last because that is the most challenging one. So I'm going to save that for the end. Okay, I need to hide the view of all of you. Oops. Okay, there we go. So we're going to take a look at the E1, E2 zoning district grouping first. Being the estate districts, they're large lots, lots of land, so it's the easiest to be able to find a place to put down an accessory dwelling unit detached from the house. So as I said, let's start with the lot coverage. In the E1 district, you're permitted up to 20%. The existing building, so that's about 13,000 square feet. The existing building is at about 5,000, which gives us a remaining buildable area of almost 8,000 square feet. Sorry, my headphones are like cutting in and out and distracting me. Okay, so then just take a quick check across impervious area. We're allowed up to 50% of impervious area. So if we're within the 20% of buildings, we should be okay there. And that means there's plenty of room for garages and patios and those sorts of great outdoor spaces that might impact your stormwater. So I kind of give that one a check mark. Okay, lot coverage, we're good to go there. Next, let's look at the gross floor area. That is calculated through a little equation. So based on the lot size, the permitted gross floor area is 10,215. Existing is 7,000. And that's different than your building coverage because of course that's the footprint and this includes second story. So subtract those two, we've got 3,000 square feet of buildable gross floor area left on that site. Okay, still got something to work with. Moving on to number 3, that max ADU size calculation. Well, I ran the calculation as a percentage of the principal building, but what was really limiting us here is that per the draft regulations, the largest an ADU could be in the estate district is 1,500 square feet. So did the math, checked it out, but ultimately 1,500 is the most you're going to be able to build on one of those sites. So, okay, check, check, check. That is less than the amount that's available per GFA. We know we have remaining buildable area. Last part, take a look at the setbacks. And as I said, the lot size really is gracious in the estate districts, leaving plenty of room on a prototypical development to locate that ADU within all of the required setbacks. So then, of course, the next thing to look at was the daylight plane. And since the daylight plane is located at the property line and the setbacks are pretty far in on the estate zone, then it was not really creating an impact. In fact, in this one, it was like all the way over here. So as perhaps anticipated, the E1 and E2 zoning district, the challenge with fitting in an ADU is not going to be related to your bulk or setback regulations. But what I did notice as Glenn was kind of giving me a tour of the village is that there's a lot of topography and existing wooded sites. So that's going to be more limiting to homeowners on whether they can build an accessory dwelling unit, particularly a detached one. They might have a heavily wooded backyard or some steep terrain that's going to make it infeasible. And I think our prototype was based on some of the newer built lots that were perhaps a little bit flatter. So that's where this came from. And you might, as I kind of said at the beginning, on sites that couldn't support a freestanding detached ADU, there's the potential that, let's say if it was heavily wooded or had a lot of steep terrain, that they could do something attached to the house or convert the upper story of a garage, that type of thing. And a quick look at the little elevations here. Excuse me. This one being 1,500 square feet. I broke that down into a 2-story ADU. So both of these floors would be living area, 8-foot high ceilings, put on a sloped roof, and we're within that 24-foot max 20-foot mean height. Okay. So now let's walk through the R2, R3 zoning district and take that same process. As we get onto smaller lots, it becomes more challenging. So here, the lot area, pretty typical for this zone district, about 10,000 square feet. The permitted coverage is 30%, and that maxes out then at 3,100. And the existing building footprint is 1,500. So that allows for about 1,580 left that we could put an ADU footprint on. And with the impervious cover, taking that into consideration, the building maximum impervious is 5,000. So the building is at 3. And when you factor in driveways, porches, etc., our buildable area is still less than that. And I think that could work on a lot that might have a lot of sidewalk or a really large driveway. They might need to take that into consideration. So moving on to the gross floor area calculations. Again, we take the full lot size and then look at what's the permitted GFA. Again, that's your FAR calculation, kind of as per laid out in the code, which once you subtract the existing house, leaves us with about 2,000 square feet of available GFA. Now you'll see that that is actually less than, well, okay, that's buildable area. You could go up in height. So then what are we allowed for an ADU? At 40% of the principal building area, your max ADU GFA is 600. And we've got 2,100 available in terms of GFA. 600 is less than the buildable area. So we know we can put a detached freestanding ADU on this site. The next part, where do we put it? Well, here we start to be a little bit challenged by the daylight plane, and in this particular, so there's a lot of existing trees, and I think I saw in maybe some of the conversation from previous workshops, there was discussion about tree mitigation, but I also thought perhaps as a homeowner, if I had a really great, nice tree in my backyard, I wouldn't want to rip it down to put my ADU up. I would want to try and dovetail that and get the best of both. So that's a consideration that some homeowners might have, whether it means siting your ADU carefully or removing trees. And in this one, we've got the 600 square feet. Let me take a jump to the next slide. So 600 square feet in gross floor area, and that's all on one floor here. We just did a little single story, and these buildings in this neighborhood, kind of based on our prototypical site, it was a mix of 1-story and 2-story buildings. So for instance, the neighbor to the right here that has a 2-story building is going to have a pretty different look at what their gross floor area is and what they have left. They might not be able to achieve the same ADU that our prototype site that has a ranch on it would be able to achieve. And the daylight plane, I kind of mentioned that on the previous slide, that did play a role in citing it, making, actually this one being a 1-story, I think it was okay. Had it been a 2-story building, it probably would have had to punch in a little bit more from the setback line. And like I said, we are trying to maximize or trying to see what's the greatest potential that this could have on the site and on the nearby neighbors. And so looking at the little 3D, you can see it's common that there are detached, I think these are garages. The particular site selected and kind of modeled, the prototype modeled on, did have an attached garage, and that would be another really feasible and I could see plausible way to integrate an ADU would be building up the garage here. Although as I say that, I think that there might be some height restrictions based on how it compares to the existing house, but I didn't explore that very far. So because we can on the back. Yep.
Oh, just feel free to finish your thought. I just want to jump in before we moved on to the next one.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, I was about wrapped up, so jump in, Glenn.
Yeah, so something to think about here, you know, one of these curious examples that exists today and, you know, is exaggerated a little bit by ADUs. How do you conceptualize it right is the idea that in the village, we allow accessory structures potentially to be built forward of a principal structure. And so if you have a through lot, especially restricting that could really limit your options on a through lot that has a street on both sides. And also, again, one of the quirks, if you would, of you know what we've drafted up is that you know theoretically an ADU could be taller than the principal structure, right? Which may be very important, but because without being able to have a ranch and a 2-story ADU, you may not be able to have a garage still on your property by the time you're done. And so there are drawbacks to whatever way you'd like to handle it. I think Valerie's example here has shown maybe something I didn't expect to see, which is on these 1-story properties, you really don't have the floor area to build that big of an ADU. And when you're building at 600 square feet, you know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go up 2 stories. And so in some ways, just by happy coincidence, happy mistake, as Bob Ross would say, you have a framework here maybe that helps in a soft way to discourage some of, you know, the ways this could be done that could be, I don't want to say poor architecture, but that could be more controversial or that may be more, you know, difficult to execute. So just not an interesting takeaway from this.
Right, that's a good point. If you were to slice this in half and use that floor area over 2 floors, you don't get very logical spaces. I think one of the really interesting things about this, the R2 and R3 zoning district is that it presents probably the widest range of options of how an ADU might be integrated onto the site because of the fact that I think a lot of these homes are an older ranch style. So there is the potential to build up or build over a garage, build down, attach or detach. So that's where I kind of had the most fun seeing the range of potential opportunities. But let me jump in now to the R4 because this one was the most tricky and has the least potential opportunities. As a preface, as we walk through this, one, the calculations are a lot more complicated. Hang with me. And really, this is a zoning district where the sites are extremely limited with the potential to put an ADU, because for the most part, I think a lot of these are built out in their allowed FAR. And if not that, then they're up to their maximum impervious cover. There's existing garage structures and patios, etc. So I was able to, through creative means, really shoehorn it in on this one site to show what that potential could be. But I think that most of the sites in R4 would have to make a compromise and give up something, whether it's garage space or a back deck or something along those lines, if they really wanted to make an ADU. It's not going to be a yes and, it might be a either or. So with that, taking a look at the lot coverage, most of the lot area, the size is a standard 6250, permitted up to 30% coverage. We've got a max permitted building coverage of 1875. The existing building coverage is 1674. However, there is an exclusion kind of cited here, that if an accessory structure is located within the rear 25% of the lot, or entirely within the rear 27 feet, I believe, then you can discount 330 square feet of that accessory structure. So taking that into consideration, I created an adjusted building coverage, which is 330 square feet less. So then subtract that from what's the total permitted coverage, and we're at 531 square feet. So if you're thinking living space, it's not quite to the minimum ADU size per the draft regulations, but and I've lived in some small apartments, but that's modest. Taking a quick look at the permitted impervious coverage, the maximum for the site's 3,750. With the building, you're at 2,205. I did a quick rough add on some driveway and front walk. So there's a little bit, we're about 1,500 square feet of impervious available, but this keeping it at a pretty conceptual level and not getting down to a site survey that you would require of your petitioners that takes into account all of their walkways, for instance. So then the gross floor area, permitted GFA, this one's actually the most straightforward FAR, 2,500 square feet for your 60/50 lot. The house itself, which I guess I called out because on this site, my prototype site, there's an existing garage, which in order to make a new ADU would have to be demoed. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go through. So I took the floor area of just the house, which is at 2,000, and the accessory structure exception, I'm blanking on where this came from. I believe this is in the regulation, the draft regulations. Just did. Let me come back to that. So we get an adjusted existing gross floor area of 2,060 and an available, subtracting that from the total, there's only 470 square feet buildable. So it's less than the buildable area, whittling this down a little bit. And just as a comparison, what would be permitted as the 40% of the full principal use? Well, that's almost twice as much. So it means that the gross floor area in this zone is the limiting factor with the 470. Okay. And then on the setbacks, this actually probably applies to most of the sites in R4, but the existing house is actually is over the setback, which is really how they have their access to the back where the existing garage is. And I don't have it drawn on here, but there was an existing garage that, as I said, in order to make this work. Originally, I thought, cool, there's an existing garage, let's put the ADU on top. But when it comes to those pesky daylight planes, it just didn't. So in order to kind of move that 2-story structure around on the site and have it just within all the daylight planes, it would mean tearing down a garage and rebuilding it. So going back to the idea of making some compromises, if you were to build an ADU in the R4, that's another, I think, challenge that would have to be overcome by a property owner. So we've nestled that right in the backyard, and I'll tell you, Glenn and I went back and forth quite a few times trying to get it quite right. So the driveway would come up the side, you turn into it, and it's also because of the limitations of the lot coverage and the gross floor area and trying to keep that ADU on top at the right size. It's a pretty minimalist garage. You could fit your 2 cars, but you're not going to be storing your ride-on mower and your snow blower in there as well. Another way that those compromises kind of come into factor. And so in this one, I lost my label. So the garage is on the ground floor, and then the unit is above, and the total area, of course, then is twice the actual building footprint there. And so the notes that I kind of came up with for this district that I've been talking through a little bit is that very few, and you can see it in the axon here, this lot that we kind of based our prototype off of, the existing mass is a little bit smaller than, say, some of those to the back that would be maxed out on their SDR. They would have to accommodate an ADU by maybe doing some interior remodeling. And as I said, the scenario removes an existing single-story garage to rebuild a new garage to be compliant with the setbacks and the daylight plane requirements. And if they have a large driveway or a lot of patios, which I think some of these houses just have beautiful landscaping, in order to build an ADU, they might have to either take some of that out or put in impervious paving, or however you might adjust that for your regulations.
Something I would add. Oh, Valerie, if I could jump in for just a second, if you can take me back to R4 for a sec. So just for the good of the order, and I give a bit of a hat tip to Member Russell for pointing this out. A couple special considerations here, if you would. If you consider this as trying to show maybe the worst case, quote unquote, or the most invasive case of how this could be done, in theory, you can probably get a couple feet closer to the side lot line, and a couple feet closer to the rear lot line. So these daylight planes, again, would give you a bit of a restriction further into the lot than the accessory structure setback, but not as far probably as what's shown there. You probably have a couple extra feet of play. I'll also note here too, one of the things I mentioned at the start was the one thing we need to fine tune was height in the daylight plane. I asked that Valerie, for our purposes, not encroach into the daylight plane. Our daylight plane regulations would allow, for example, a gable end to cross the plane, but knowing that we need to keep fine tuning this and then it probably wouldn't change the size, I asked her just to not pull things like gable ends or dormers, anything like that, into a position where it would break the plane. So just understand, depending on where that all lands, potentially this could be a few feet more to the left or to the west, or a few feet more to the rear. You're still talking a maximum of 5 feet of change in either direction.
Good clarification. I was just looking at my notes while you were talking, Glenn, because I wanted to come up and clarify when I said the accessory structure exception here is 440. Yeah, that was from that same, no, it's not. Well, it's excluded because it's in the rear 25%, I'll tell you that much. I think this one was a different one, but I've got a couple of slides, we could put it on here to look at the comparisons, but I wanted to provide you all the opportunity for questions or comments.
review that exception rule? I didn't quite understand it.
Sure, let me pull up, I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment so that I can pull that document up.
I think it's right at 940. I think maybe there was a little math error at the bottom.
Size definition. What was it, 10? Okay, so one of them, where's my PowerPoint? I think, oh, here, okay, so this is what it is. Hold on, let me reshare my screen. Share screen. Okay, so when we're looking at the lot coverage calculations, there is an existing regulation in 1058C2 that says if you have an accessory structure within the rear 25%, then you can discount up to 330 square feet of it. So that was kind of looking at the existing lot coverage, and when there was a garage there, I think that was taking that into account. Then with the gross floor area, the exception here for 440, I think, is the one that goes with the draft regulations that says if there's a garage or shed space that's in the same structure as the ADU, then that could be discounted from the FAR. And I can share that if that's helpful.
I understand. Okay, thank you.
So to me, I'll just make my comments. To me, the takeaway here is we're probably not going to see a lot of these in the R4 district just due to the limitations. And in the R2, R3, it's not a problem, there's more problems, but not a big problem. In E1 and E2, lots of opportunities. And I think that goes, in my opinion, in keeping with having the least impact. If someone in the E1 and E2 wants to do this, they have the most freedom, and that's fine given the lot sizes. I don't see a problem with that. The R2 is going to be more selective, but it still seems in keeping with kind of the other situations with people with detached garages in the back, back. For smaller houses, they might be able to do this. For bigger houses, they may not, and that's okay. And then in the R4, limited opportunities, and I think we want to manage bulk in those areas, so we may not see many. So I don't know, I think this has been helpful, and I'm not surprised, and I'm actually reassured that the results are in keeping with what I would say is kind of what we want to do in terms of the impact to the community from a bulk and impervious service perspective.
Yeah, this is Susan. I echo that. I think that here's a circumstance in which our bulk regulations take a lot of the burden off of us in terms of making distinctions between property uses, one type of property use and versus another. I would leave it to the homeowner to make the decision as to how they might trade off floor space between the ADU and their other living space. For example, in the R4, they might choose to incorporate the ADU into their already existing home, and we should, create regulations that allow them to do that if they want to make that kind of trade-off. I think these illustrations were really helpful to that, and I continue to support the ADU concept.
I have a question. On the R4 district, there are several homes on double lots. They're just big lots on smaller homes. If somebody wanted to do an ADU on that, would they use the second lot dimensions for the size of the ADU, at which point it could be rather large? And then what would they use it for? Is it rental or family? Does it impact what we're talking about now if we're talking about an exceptionally large lot on R4?
Yeah, so I would say high level, Member Miller, you know, what you see in the R2, R3 district is, you know, that's roughly 2 R4 lots put together, dimensionally. So, you know, that R2, R3 example is a little bigger than a 75 by 125. And, you know, a typical R4 lot is, I say typical, there's a lot of variation in that area, but a typical prototypical lot would be a 50 by 125. So as you get in those lots that, you know, are a double lot or a lot and a half, or some of these more unusual configurations you see in the original plats of town, again, you are talking about more space, potentially a bigger unit that may look like a one-story unit, like what you're seeing in the R2, R3 example. That may just be a bigger detached garage.
So really, we're talking about lot sizes rather than zoning districts. We want to be precise. We're using zoning districts as an example, but it's based on the size of the lot, what can be put on there.
I think the zoning district does play a role because the coverage is different in the districts where you can have, oh wait, I'm probably going to prove myself wrong. No, yeah, the coverage is the same on both of them. So you are correct.
Yeah, and Elliot, my understanding is even if it was a small property on a big lot, as we've got in our draft regulations, the accessory dwelling unit can only be 40% of the gross floor area of the principal residence. So if they have a small house on a big lot, they're just going to have a small ADU.
I forgot about that 40% rule. Okay, that makes sense. Because that puts a real restriction on the sizes, obviously, of what can be built. So I think that's very good. Okay, thank you.
And can I just confirm, because I wasn't involved in the earlier things, for the E1 and E2, are you still capping it at a maximum of 1,500 square feet, or is there a cap on those?
Currently, I think
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, so depending on there's always 2 rules and you have to go by the lesser. And depending on which district you're in determines which rule you're following, right? So in the typical residential districts, it's 40% or 1,000 square feet. In the estate districts, it's 40% or 1,500 square feet. And out of that number, you're excluding anything that might be used for a garage or for storage. Again, trying not to make people choose between satisfying that limit and having livable space. But the idea is that we're keeping these structures proportionate to the principal structure. Again, bearing in mind this is supposed to be an accessory use. It's not supposed to be 2 houses on 1 lot.
Okay, so Glenn, you're saying it's the smaller of the 2. So for instance, in E1 or E2, likely it would be a cap of 1,500?
That's what I would expect on most lots in that area.
Okay, thanks.
I guess I'm not opposed to this type of an approach from an E1, E2 perspective, but I still have great trepidation with respect to R2, R3, R4. I would be a proponent of special use for those 3 districts. E1, E2, I think it's always been pretty well accepted that would be a reasonable alternative for those homeowners.
We talking about
the,
special use or permitted? Is that part of the discussion we're coming up with? Are we at that point?
Well, I'm not sure, Elliot, if we're at that point. I know we discussed it generally at some point in the past.
I'd like to agree with you. This should all be special use except for E1, E2.
Member Russell here, I guess I'm coming down differently on that. I feel like we've got a set of regulations that you all controls the overall development on the different lot sizes, and not quite sure what we would achieve by asking people to go through a special use permit review process. And what the differences would be is if this middle, not talking about variations now from these rules, but if they comply with the regulations that we draft, why do we feel that we would need to bring them through a special use, and what would we be judging? We should be allowing the same intensity of development on comparative lot sizes. So I'm not in favor of that concept being talked about, special use.
I agree. Well said. I mean, from my perspective.
I agree as well. It seems to me if they're within the other regulations, then, you know, how they're opting to build it within that space is not dependent on which zone they're in or district they're in. So I would say it's not a special use, it's permitted use.
Yeah, I agree also, just because I think you give more consistency by doing it.
Yes.
I agree. I mean, I think there's so many things that are already in play with our variance and our smaller lots and our height restrictions and our setbacks that I can't imagine. I mean, there's going to be enough hardship to see if that could even happen in an R4, let alone, you know, causing a restriction on our end. I think it should be just the same and permitted throughout every district. I'm worried about like the E1 when you could, there's no issue with height, but there's issue with trees, and just want to make sure when we really start fine tuning this that we, you know, any tree that's torn down that, you know, they need to be replaced, or, you know, just have something in that in writing for we.
Would be part of the tree restricted ordinance that we already have, I would think.
Right. Or maybe just across the board.
Yeah, Jill, they're gonna, any development that proposes to take down any protected tree is gonna have to replace them in kind or with equivalent DBH, or pay considerably for them through the ordinance. So no one's gonna be allowed to take a considerable number of trees down without a penalty, if you will.
Right.
That'll be part of their decision-making process. I do have a couple questions, if now's the appropriate time, with our having sat on these regulations for 6 months and then rereading them and relearning them today. If Glenn is now or Chair Peters, is now the right time to ask a couple questions about our existing draft?
You certainly could, George. I guess there's also an interest in certain public comment, so to speak.
Oh, okay.
I
Didn't realize there was public.
I didn't realize that either till Mr. Cole mentioned it to me. So maybe let's take the public comment real quickly. Maybe allocate 3 minutes per participant.
Sure, and this one's actually written out, so I'll just read it. And of course, happy to recognize you if you'd like to speak, Mickey. This is from Mickey Collins. Her question: homeowners could create many types of ADUs within our existing bulk limitations. Why do we need to allow taller coach houses at the rear of our backyards? Coach houses are usually used where there are alleys that separate them from the rear neighbors. Evanston and Oak Park are examples.
Any other public comment, Glenn?
That was the only comment, Mr. Chairman. And I would also say, I think Ms. Collins is the only member of the public, at least in the Zoom meeting at this point.
Okay. Do we know what some of our neighboring communities are doing with ADUs?
Sure. It's been a while, so I'll try to work this from recollection. Certainly, we can circulate an updated study here shortly. I know Lake Forest for a while was involved in regulating them, and certainly I don't think they have a positive outlook towards allowing them. I think their interest in regulation was really to get a better handle on their existing inventory. I believe, I know Highland Park is having some discussions around the topic. Either Winnett or Winnetka, maybe both, are discussing it as well, and I believe one allows it. As you get to the south, as Ms. Collins mentioned, Oak Park and Evanston have both allowed them for some time. I know Evanston relaxed its rules. I live in Evanston, so I just happen to know these things. Relaxed their rules around this at the start of 2020 to be a bit more permissive. And then a lot of discussion towards the end of last year as the city of Chicago, I believe, passed their ordinance allowing more accessory dwelling units to be built. And that was on the heels of considerable study. I believe we circulated a ULI study that was done in that case late last year. So certainly where people end up, how permissive or restrictive they are, hard to say. I mean, certainly there's a lot of interest right now, I think for the same reasons we are discussing, which is just, you know, throughout Chicagoland, throughout the country, you're seeing an increase in housing needs that aren't traditional single family. And especially in the pandemic, as we heard, there's a lot of interest in alternate living situations that keep people close to home, or, you know, give them alternatives to, you know, living in a more age-focused community. Hard to say where people end up on that balance of restrictions and character and handling those needs, but I think that's the flavor of the conversation.
Thank you. Member Russell.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to respond to member Vicki Collins's comment that if she's still listening, it's one of the things that I have struggled with throughout our discussions is this issue of potentially having two-story building in the backyard that is close to the back property line with a dwelling unit on the second floor that will essentially then look down on the, easily look down on the rear yards of the properties on the other side of the rear yard lot line. I know that since our discussions first started on this, draft regulations have tightened up to propose to impose the daylight plane restriction on the rear yard lot line also. Right now, of course, our regulation only applies to interior side yards. So if we have a taller structure coming in, it will force the structure away from the rear yard lot line. But as the meeting began tonight, it still was one of my big question marks. Have we done enough to make sure that we don't get what appears to be a big structure that's so close that it really impinges on the light, sunshine, if it's a northerly lot on the other side of the lot line, that this might create. That I thought that slide in our very first item tonight, where Member Badger sent in the picture showing the property that was asking for the small side yard variation, where they had built that tree fort all the way back in the corner with what really was a shed on stilts, and how obtrusive that can be when it's very close to the rear lot line. So I still have some concerns about that if the numbers are tough enough. Because if someone wants to put an accessory dwelling unit in their rear yard and build it above a garage, their own rear yard ought to absorb the penalty of that accessory dwelling unit by forcing it away from the rear yard lot line, and not allow it to get too close to the rear yard lot line, because it really will impact the aesthetics and the privacy, so on and so forth, of the property owner on the other side. Having said all that, I'm convinced that it is going to be very difficult in our R4 district, given the draft regulations, for someone to build an accessory dwelling unit on top of a garage, because permitted floor area just is not there. The sample that was provided for us tonight miraculously had an available floor area of 470 square feet, but I guarantee you, you do not see that very often in the R4 district, except with some of the older, smaller homes that remain. And a lot of those are single story. So that would keep the accessory dwelling unit down, the height of that down to a single story also, which in my view would not be a problem. I did have the two questions that I had. As I thought about this, we have a requirement here that the accessory dwelling unit must have a separate entrance from the exterior. And it would seem to me that the type of case that we're most likely to see is someone that wants to build out a space either in their basement or within their home. And the building code is going to drive the safety access requirements, but I wonder from a zoning perspective, if someone wants to put their in-laws in a part of their home and wants them to come in the same door, why would we object to that? I don't want, just throw that out there. The only other question I had, and I guess, Glenn, this is directed towards you. I was on the first page of our 4-page regulation sheet, down at the bottom under size, 1E. As I read this, and I've read it over and over, it seems to me the way this is written that we're actually proposing to do away with our bonus provision for detached structures in the rear yard. And that's not what we're doing at all, as was verified through the different calculations that we went through. But I'm not quite sure that we've written that correctly. And then I guess one other comment is I after seeing the Arden Shore subdivision proposal come through, I was sort of a mind that maybe the Country Estate District, which requires 4.5 acres of lot, that maybe we ought to split out a third size category and allow, another bump of 500 square feet, 2,000 on these in the Country Estate District. And that's the extent of my comments.
Hey, George, I've got a question for you, question and a comment. Can you repeat or further explain the question that you had about your in-laws or your parents staying with you? I didn't quite follow it. So you're saying, yeah, go ahead.
Right now, the draft regulations say that there must be a separate entrance from the exterior.
Right.
And from a zoning perspective, I'm wondering why we would require that. If someone wants their in-laws to come in through their same doors in their house, what do we care? Now, if their living space is is down in the basement, and the building code, the life safety codes require, you know, a new access from the basement, and that the building code is going to take care of that. But why do we care from a zoning perspective about the separate entrance? I can't. I'm not agreeing with that at the current time.
Okay, no, I got it. Thank you. Yeah, no, it's a good, certainly a good question, and I'm not really exactly sure why either. And then separately, oh gosh. I just wanted to comment, and I agree with you on the country estate. I'd be happy to make a third category because I think it makes sense. They've just got so much space. Having an accessory dwelling of 2,000 would be in keeping with houses that are probably on that lot.
So, Chair Peters, if I may.
Yes, Mr. Schuster.
So on Member Russell, your question in regards to why we care whether somebody is living in an accessory dwelling unit that's separated with a different entrance, and I think that the reason for this definition and the reason why it's structured the way it is not a value statement on one thing being better than the other, separated is better than joined. It's a definitional issue in our code, which is if somebody's living in under the same roof in the same house with one entrance, it's not an accessory unit. It's part of the same unit. It's part of the same house. And there are different regulations that govern it. And so under our code, for example, we have in a single family house, you're limited to the family definition would be an example. So we have a pretty expansive definition of family in our code, but it does restrict, for example, the ability for, eight people unrelated just to turn it into, let's call it a long-term boarding house. By separating into different buildings with different entrances or so forth, you aren't as restricted by the same family definition, and therefore you may be governed more by accessory dwelling units. So part of the regulations deal less with use and more with structural issues. And I think you also hit the nail on the head in some respects that when you're under one roof, there are all sorts of other regulations that apply under the building code or the residential code about, how that home may be laid out. And so part of this exercise about the accessory dwelling unit is to address what happens when you have two different structures, or you have, that are physically apart, or if it's joined, but when they have a separate entrance and function as a completely separate living unit. So I hope that helps. Again, I don't know that it's a value statement, but it is something I think, as you just talk about in general, intensity of use on a lot, to consider, what regulations are most important to you, which makes sense.
But then if we adopt these regulations as drafted, and that remains, if the family comes into the village hall and wants to build a separate kitchen unit in their basement, or anywhere in the home. So it's there, literally set up a separate living space with a separate kitchen, separate baths. They would have to come to the zoning board for variation, I take it. And we would have the authority to grant it, would we not?
If they came, I'm just trying to understand the question. So if they came to us and they wanted two different living units within the same structure with the same entranceway?
Correct.
We'd have the authority to grant it?
Correct.
I'd have to take a close look at the code. One of the questions you can't generally, I think it depends, if it's about simply the living unit and the physical features, that's different if you're talking about multiple family. And I think there's a distinction that's important there to be drawn. So for example, if somebody's seeking modifications to the building code and what they could do, there's a process for doing that. That would be separate though if you are talking about multiple families and is trying to live in a single family house. And you're talking about a use variation, which is not generally permitted under our code.
Okay,
Coming,
I just think we'll have
go
a,
ahead.
we will deal with this issue if we adopt it as written. It's, I just know that someone's gonna want to build a separate bathing, cooking and sleeping areas and but they're not gonna want to put it, if it's in the house, and they're not gonna want to put a separate door onto the house, you know, a third door, if you will, and into wherever this space is. So maybe we could need to chew on that for a while before we button this up.
George, I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I recall reading it, but had not focused on it considerably. It does seem to me odd. I guess I had thought that currently, if they had a space like this, no separate entrance, but did have bathing, cooking, sleeping area within their home, that was technically a violation. But is that what village attorney is saying, that as long as there was no separate entrance, it would currently be compliant? Or I guess now I'm somewhat confused about what the current state is.
Yeah.
My assumption is it would not be allowed. If someone comes in for a permit right now to build out a second kitchen, and
that was my assumption as well, which is why it's puzzling, as you point out, that we would require a second entrance. I don't know. It just seems counterintuitive to me, although not completely inconsistent, but sort of counterintuitive to me. Is it typical for an ADU? You know, I guess I hadn't really appreciated the significance, but as George points out, it could be significant.
Yeah, so if I can, let me answer the current policy question and then move to the draft. So currently, we understand the code is not intended to allow accessory dwelling units. We interpret the code very broadly to prohibit building things that look like accessory dwelling units. So if you're building a second kitchen or perhaps living and bathing areas, any number of combinations, we generally interpret the code not to allow those. There are highly specific exceptions that I can think of. I mean, in one case, you know, there's a Jewish family with a kosher kitchen in addition to an ordinary kitchen. I mean, there are other unique examples like that. But that's, again, broadly, we interpret the code to be very inflexible on this subject. Now, as far as the draft is concerned, right, I would say that as a starting place, we patterned our code on similar codes. There are many communities in the country that do this. There are some communities in the West that I think are required to allow it. And in those codes, a separate entrance is a common requirement. I'd have to look into it a bit more to tell you what the importance of it is. To be honest with you, that's not one we had really dived into deeply. Certainly I could, just speaking extemporaneously, you know, I could give you a few reasons that might be of interest. Of course, you'd want to create privacy for, you know, the occupants of that unit. We like to not, you know, in the interest of property values, right? We like to not create, how do I put this? Disamenities, if you would. And so when we think about highly specific use cases, you know, it may be advantageous. You know, you'd want that a house could be, you know, maybe your in-laws are living in there today, but they may not be tomorrow. And maybe you'd want that house to be able to be sold to someone that would not use it in the same way. The argument to that, of course, would be that that's the property owner's problem. But conversely, as we pointed out, we expect these will be relatively rare. They're valuable in the view of the village's comprehensive plan for meeting these housing needs. And so, you know, do you want to create these units in a way that really limits their ability to be reused going on? Again, that's just reacting to the conversation. We can certainly bring you back a deeper look into that at your next meeting.
May I chime in?
Certainly.
Yes,
Sure.
please.
So I've been turning this over in my mind while listening to you speak, and I'm thinking that architecturally speaking, for the building code, if you have two separate dwelling units within the same building, you're going to have a fire separation between those. And I don't think that you can exit from one occupancy into another. So it might actually be a requirement of the building code that then has morphed into, as we see in the other neighboring jurisdictions, and then just best practice, that you have to have a separate entrance. And I could be wrong on that, but it just seems like if you take some of those residences in R4 that have a very large second floor, let's say you want to convert that, I think there would be some significant work in building a fire rated wall, not only vertically between the spaces on all the sides, but also separating the floor. And then that's where you need a separate egress path, which would be in the zoning, we're calling it an entrance, but from building it'd be considered egress.
Thank you.
Can I just say a couple things? Number one, I think that, it's Deb. I think that Lake Forest, either in 2014 or 2015, did definitely approve a granny flats criteria in their living spaces. So I wasn't able to find it. I did look for it quickly, but I wasn't able to find it. But I do think that they did approve it. I just don't know what the regulations are regarding it. Second, in the larger lot areas, if you were to do this, I'm assuming, let's say a property had a ravine on it or something, then typically the structure, our ravine codes would fall into play, and you couldn't build something closer to that than you would normally, or something if you were looking to do the ADU there, correct? But Glenn, that would work. Okay. And then, yeah, I would definitely be in favor of allowing a bump up in square footage for the country estates. That's why I was kind of asking about the caps on E1 and E2. I just think that some of them have so much space that 1,500 square feet is tight relative to those kinds of square footages in country estates. So thanks.
Thank you, Deb. I guess the general concern that I have, especially with the R2 to R4 scenario, is that there could be some significant unintended consequences resulting from a carte blanche permissive philosophy. I'm concerned about the reduction in green space. I'm concerned about the impact on certain neighbors. Obviously, you can't speculate as to how it'll play out till you see some plans. But I would urge that the commission look more critically at the R2 through R4 from a special use permit. What's next?
Certainly. So I've heard a few things here. Let me suggest perhaps a few paths forward. So one is, coming into this, we knew we needed to continue to fine tune where these height regulations worked. And certainly a couple minor changes here that I think we can implement. It sounds like we should bring you a bit more of a look as well into where some of our North Shore communities are at with their conversations, and maybe some more background, some more context on the separate entrance provision. I think all that we can do for you by your next meeting. What I'd like to do, I can't guarantee this group will be amenable to it. I think so. I think we can get on their agenda. Is if we think what we've seen here today is pretty close, I'd like to go take these before the Architectural Board of Review, perhaps at their regular April meeting. We'll do our presentation. Anyone from here is welcome to join, and if there needs to be a joint meeting from a notice perspective, we can do that. But we'll take it to the ABR. We'll get some of their feedback captured, and then we can bring that to an April discussion. And then from there, it's a matter of how fast you want to go. Again, if we think we're pretty close, if it's not premature, I wouldn't start a hearing, but in April, we can bring you, an ordinance draft, ordinance language, something very close to a fully baked product, or we can allow for some more substantive discussion in April if you'd like.
And Elliot, I just want to make a comment from what George said. I'd like to reiterate what he said about keeping a two-story building away from the lot line in these smaller areas. I think it would be very intrusive to put a second story in a garage that's at the back of the house. I wouldn't want that looking into my backyard. I think that should be a major, well, I think it should be an issue that we need to address and maybe move the lot line, how far from the lot line these structures can be. The one-story garage is much different than a two-story garage, the neighborhood and the neighbors. And I think that is a big concern of mine. It could be a big concern of mine.
And let me sound out something here that maybe is drawing a few of these threads together. And Chair Peters, if I could, let me ask you this. Sure. In the R4 area, is it any accessory dwelling unit that gives you concern, or is it really just the idea of a detached, separate structure? So let's say someone converted a basement into an accessory dwelling unit. Do you still think the same risks are there?
No, I would not be concerned about a basement scenario.
Okay. And then I guess following up, if you had a one-story in the back, if someone said, I'll give up my garage, Granny needs a place to live, or something, I don't know. If you just had a one-story unit in the back, I'm guessing that probably still gives you some heartburn.
It does to me personally.
I mean, if it's a garage versus a one-story live-in, I'm not sure there's a difference visually or intrusively. I mean, if you have a garage already there, I don't know what it would be to convert it to a living situation. What would be the difference in doing that?
I only say that to say, I think it's, Chair Peters, some of your concerns are certainly very reasonable, and it may be, it may be the simplest course until you have some more, Ms. Collins is right when she says that places that allow coach houses tend to have different arrangements, right? They have alleys, they have a bit more space house to house. Certainly the density of our R4 district is unique. And so if you're tailoring this a bit, if you said, that in some of these zones, the detached unit is where you're getting into a special use, that might be the compromise that smooths a lot of this out. I'll say, as always, Lake Bluff uses special use permits in residential districts a lot. Professionally, I hesitate to recommend them just because there's a lot of cost involved for an individual homeowner, and quite frankly, it tends to put developers at more of an advantage than an individual homeowner, depending on the circumstances. There's other things, but if you're looking for a compromise path here, certainly that would be one way of looking at it, and that would assure you that when we talk about these small rear yard situations, that would give you a bit more of a look into them, and you could always reevaluate a few permits down the road. But I would just offer that based on some of the conversation we're hearing.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about the potential irreversible impact that a certain scenario could have on a neighbor or several neighbors. And I would not necessarily want to be one of those neighbors that was adversely impacted in that manner. And that's one of my critical concerns.
So certainly that could be an option we bring you in April as well.
But I must say, I think Valerie's presentation was very well done, very enlightening, and I really do appreciate it, and I think the entire commission really appreciates it.
Happy to be of service.
So I think we've got, again, if there's no objection, we'll see if we can get in front of the Architectural Board of Review in April before your next meeting. We'll bring back some of those items we discussed, and we can go from there unless there's anything else to add. But I think we've got some pretty good direction to work with.
Fine, from my perspective.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks again, Valerie. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very welcome.
And item number 7, Mr. Cole, if you want to give us a brief overview.
Certainly. So in this case, this can be as long or as short of a conversation as we like to finish up the evening. We knew going in from some of our conversations with the Arden Shore subdivision and some other discussions that there are a few issues with how irregular lots are treated in the code that we wanted to try and clean up a bit. I'm not quite comfortable with recommending that you move forward with these, but it was far enough along that we wanted to at least put in front of you, start to see if there were any reactions. So we would recommend in this case that you open and continue the public hearing to a date certain, that being your next regularly scheduled meeting on April 21st for continued discussion. So, but really by way of explanation, all we're trying to do here is for some irregular lots, it's not as clear as we would like from a legal standpoint, how they take front yards and how their front setback is determined. It's also perhaps on some lots, you end up with an unintentionally narrow lot width artificially, which a downside for the homeowner, as we saw with Arden Shore, artificially lowers their height limit. A downside really for adjacent homeowners is it artificially may shorten their side yard setbacks. In many cases, there are conditions of a subdivision or plat that smooth that out, but just generally we're trying to make that, we're trying to make a clear set of ground rules. Things I don't like about this approach, it adds more complexity to the code. I wish I could make it simpler, but it itself, I think, is about as simple as a solution as we can come up to some of these practical problems. So specifically for flag lots, the width is the width of the pole and the flag on top of the pole. And then many of our irregular lots that fall into this are on Lake Michigan. And so just you would take the greater of the ordinary width, or really the width setback from Lake Michigan. So that's our concept right now. We're still testing it in a few cases, but happy to hear any comments, or if there are none, happy to continue this to April.
Member Russell. Member Russell here. Glenn, I think the word you were looking for in your new definitions under lot width down at the very bottom was 100 feet west of the most easterly point. East sides of the lot along Lake Michigan, we don't have any westerly sides of lots along Lake Michigan.
I think where we're trying to go for there, right, is, Lake Michigan's here and then it comes in a bit and then it goes down, or maybe it's at an angle. We want it to be a straight line bearing, but just west of the, the furthest west Michigan, Lake Michigan's coming in. Maybe that's clear as mud, I'm not sure, but. I'll share my screen here if this helps a bit.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So you can see here, Lake Michigan is further to the east here in the northerly part of the lot. It comes in, it comes out. It comes in very far to the west, and then this is actually, this is a particularly confusing lot, but this is where it starts to turn to a ravine. But this is the end of the retaining wall and rock armoring. And so here is where we're taking that most westerly point. We're jogging in 100 feet, and then we're taking that north-south dimension.
Okay.
Any other comments from the commissioners on this issue tonight? Looks as though we're going to probably just continue the matter to the 21st of April. But, hearing none, Glenn, what's the procedure to simply continue the public hearing to the 21st?
You would ask for a motion to do precisely that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Was that member Burns on the second?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further discussion? Could I have a roll call, please?
Certainly. Member Burns.
Aye.
Member Danley.
Aye.
Member Fisher.
Aye.
Member Miller.
Aye.
Member Ryder.
Aye.
Member Russell.
Aye.
And Chair Peters.
Aye. Item number 8. Glenn, if you want to introduce that, please.
Certainly. Very brief staff report. So the village board chose ultimately to indefinitely extend the village's short-term rental regulations. It had expressed their appreciation for your consideration, but so they struck the expiration date applicable to those at their last meeting earlier this month. They also approved the Arden Shore Plata subdivision and the text amendment that went with that. As you'll recall, this now triggers, before that property is developed, the golf course will have to come back through the Architectural Board of Review. The accessory dwelling units would have to come back through here, through the Plan Commission. So no dirt turning yet, but again, that's been approved. The auto body shop approved, et cetera, et cetera. For next month, not sure what to expect yet, aside from these last 2 items on your agenda. You may have a variation involving our floor area rules. So there's a house that has a particularly tall ceiling where they'd like to extend out that second floor, but it's non-conforming as to floor area already, so that even though it doesn't change that outside envelope, it increases the non-conformity. So you may see that. Not sure what else is coming at this point. Of course, no updates regarding the Stonebridge property. Nothing else particular of interest to report. Oh, I would say the Historic Preservation Commission did make a new set of recommendations to the village board Monday night. There is a text amendment this group recommended a few months ago that is tied up in that, procedurally speaking, but again, historic preservation, important housing policy in the village, part of the comprehensive plan. Certainly would encourage anyone with an interest in that to stay tuned for how that develops. That would conclude my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Cole.
Chair Peters, I have one thing, if I may.
Certainly.
Oh, thank you. So just one thing I wanted to go back to was at the beginning of the meeting, the first item, I think it was 210 West Washington, at the motion that was made, and I tried to clarify it. I just wanted to come back to the motion making, because I want to make sure that that we're precise in the motions that are being put forth. So we all know what we're talking about when somebody says, I approve the application. And for our purposes of understanding, that may be fine, and we all get it. From a legal perspective, I think it's important that we are precise with our motions. So for example, with that item in particular, there's a resolution, an order that we're approving, and in it has conditions and all sorts of terms. And so the legal issue comes if we make a motion that is just approve the application and either don't say, you know, approve the approval document that we have or with the conditions. Theoretically, what could happen is, you know, if we run into a problem with the applicant a year from now, and they say, well, you approved my application, you never said anything about conditions. And they would go back to the tape, and sure enough, that's what they would have, is the motion. And what we want to make sure is that what we're clearly approving includes all the standard conditions or any special conditions you have. So for example, it says in there for the variation that the variation is contingent upon their compliance with plans. So they can't build something else. We don't want to have a fight a year from now. So that's why I stopped and just wanted to clarify. And so just think about when we're making motions, if it's so if we're approving the variation and it's within your authority, you can move to approve the resolution or approve the application in accordance with the resolution would be just fine. If we're just a recommending body, and it's going to the village board for approval, again, I would say that the motion should include all the conditions that you typically would want. And so it's not just approve the application, it would be approve the application subject to, and then we should be listing off the conditions so that way they're caught on the recording and it's clear in minutes exactly what the motion is. So I hope that clarifies what I was trying to do. And of course, I'm always here to help you formulate motions so we get the wording down, because it can be a little complicated.
We have to redo the motion?
For tonight?
Yeah.
No, because I jumped in, I clarified and said, is set forth in the approval document. And I think that's fine and clear, because, but just in the future, just so I just don't want to create questions in what I'm doing, so why I'm doing it. But that's the issue that came up.
So Ben, just to be clear, if we don't have any special consideration or special conditions, we can just reference the document in the packet, as drafted and reviewed in the packet.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
If you don't like
all the conditions.
No, you don't have to read them all one by one, word by word, but we just need enough reference so that if a judge were to look at the tape or somebody reads our minutes, it's clear, not just to us who know the lingo and the language and what we intend, but to somebody who would have no idea, so they can go, yeah, that makes sense. So.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Commissioners report. Any activity with respect to Jaguar?
I know that they are still seeking a new tenant for their existing property. I'm not familiar with where the progress is on their new property, but certainly they're not walking away from that by any means. So hard to believe, the last time we talked about ADUs was actually before the last time they finally got their approval after all was said and done. So still relatively recent.
Have they cleared the land?
I don't believe so, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Anything else from the commissioners? All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
I missed the second. Was that Ms. Fisher?
Fisher, yeah. Mhm.
Excellent. All right. Member Burns. I'm sorry, was that a yes?
That was a aye, but I'll say yes.
Okay. Sorry, it broke up a little bit on our end. Member Danley,
Yes.
Member Fisher,
Yes.
Member Miller,
Yes.
Member Ryder,
Yes.
Member Russell,
Yes.
and Chair Peters.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Best of luck to those who are involved in the elections coming up. I guess we'll reconvene in April. So take care of yourselves.
Thanks.
Thanks, you
Good
too.
night, everybody.
Good night. Bye-bye.